Well, hello, I'm Elle Potter with Yoga Buzz, and we have these series of interviews that we're doing with a bunch of really fantastic people from across the country who are integrating yoga into their fields to change the world. I'm here with my friend Livia Cohen-Shapiro, MA, who she trains and mentors teachers who are kind of intersecting the world of yoga and psychology. And so, hello.
Hi.
How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So talk a little bit about your background, Livia.
My background is in yoga, psychology, religious studies. I started practicing yoga when I was about 15 and had the good fortune of having some really good or I should say excellent therapists at a young age. And so I grew up with sort of the understanding that yoga and psychology were not separate because I did not experience them as separate and had gone through times in my life where I would separate them and get some benefit from just diving into yoga or some benefit to having a good therapist, and ultimately really have contemplated and lived in very deeply this place of actually you need both to do what you want to do. Certainly for myself, that's been true, and have studied and taught all of that at length. My bachelor's is in psychology and Eastern religious studies, and then my master's is from Naropa University in body-centered counseling. We call that somatic counseling psychology. And
one of the things that I appreciate most about you is how just honest and upfront you are about a bunch of different things. Like most of the time, the posts that you share on Facebook, for example, I just kind of like stand up and cheer. I'm like, yay, thank you for saying that. And I think one of the things that you have shared that was really impactful, and I'm sure it's not just for me, but for others as well, is what it was that led you into the world of somatic therapy after becoming a yoga teacher.
I've been teaching yoga for quite some time and had in a past history of variety of eating disorders, and was very much in a place of, okay, the yoga is like so amazing. My life is so much better now. The yoga totally helped me in this process, and I really want to, pay it forward. And I had decided I wanted to work with that population. And I developed a curriculum to work in a outpatient sort of network facility that dealt with all different kinds of disordered eating patterns. So basically we had like a weekly class there in their sort of activities room. And I was like super gung-ho, like, yes, like yoga fixes eating disorders. Okay. So I like go in, and very quickly I was like, oh shit, this is going to be not so great. Because what I started observing was sometimes the disordered eating behaviors and symptoms for the students who were coming to class, they were getting worse. Like they would experience like something that had been maybe less active or even in remission, it would like come up again, or something started getting like their emotional reactivity got even more so, and I had this one student who was coming all the time who was a binge eater, and she actually went through a phase where it got a lot worse, and I sought counsel and supervision and around that, and ultimately, I was working with other therapists and whatnot, so she did get the support that she needed, not necessarily from me. I mean, she got yoga support, but so what I came to very quickly was like, okay, this is great. Like I can teach yoga, I can teach asana, I can teach about the emotions, but I also realized like, oh wow, I actually don't have a certain skill set, which is psychotherapeutic skills. Like these are skills that I did not get in teacher training. These are skills that I actually was not taught or could not access for some reason. And I was like, I need more training. So flash forward, I ended up at Naropa in somatic counseling, and there, obviously, it's a counseling program, and there I really did get very clear, specific psychotherapeutic skills that, sure, we can call them psychotherapy, we can call them counseling, but actually, if you distill them down, really what they are human skills, they're human relationship skills. And what I started doing, teaching inner and outer spiral, or teaching handstand, or teaching that's all fine and good, but what if the student confesses something to you? Then what do you do? Like, no amount of handstanding and knowledge of that is going to actually help you help them.
Yeah.
So it was that set of interpersonal skills. And then what I did was kind of spin it on its head so that it actually was relatable to the context of someone who is in a teacher-student relationship, not a psychotherapeutic relationship.
Yeah.
And so that's in working with a population that was so obviously close to home for myself. I would go through bouts where some of my even behavior patterns, or like the impulse for the behavior pattern, would get so strong. And so it really led me down a path of like, okay, if I'm going to work that close to home, I have to be really clear about what's mine, what's theirs, what am I picking up on that's theirs. And a lot of people, they go to yoga, they are very moved by the practice, and they're like, oh, I want to be a yoga teacher. And then they become a yoga teacher, and they're like, oh my God.
Right.
It's so intense.
Right. Well, yeah, going through that first teacher in workshop intensive environment, it's a process of opening and opening and opening over and over again. And I think that is something that gets missed out on in the conversation of yoga, is the human skills, as you said. I think that there is that desire to want to help, and forgetting what else might be behind the story of the person that you're working with, the students that you're working with, that ultimately can be re-traumatizing, although the intentions are good. But I really appreciate that integration of what you do with psychology skills specifically for yoga teachers. I know that it was, when I did the first session with you, I was just like, heck. What advice would you have for somebody who's wanting to work with a specific population that's close to home? What advice might you have for a yoga teacher specifically?
Yeah, sure. My advice for a yoga teacher who wants to work with a special population or specific population, whether it's close to home or not, I think it still applies, is that there has to be a certain amount of internal work that is constantly at play. You cannot walk through life or be face to face with the realities that others have faced and not be impacted. Mm-hmm. And so much of, I think, the exquisite nature of life is that we feel impacted. We are moved by situations and people and practices, and that's a beautiful thing. And I think that when we are so empathic and we are so willing to be impacted, there are a lot of things that come up, like we either try not to feel the impact so much, so we put on some front, or we hide away, or we be really tough, or we sort of crumble inside, and it's like we sort of wither with being always in that space. And so if we can stay in a place where we're very dynamic, but yet at rest, and alert, but sort of rested, then we're able to be impacted and move on, and be impacted and move on, and be impacted and move on. And that takes a certain level of sort of inner process and inner strength. So my advice is often if you want to do the work, you have to be the work. You have to go and do it yourself. You have to go and be engaging in that yourself, and really knowing where you end and begin. When I was in my internship, one of the things that we talked a lot about in supervision was what are you willing and not willing to work with? Mm-hmm. An example might be, are you willing to work with someone who was the abuser versus the person who's been abused? It's easy to identify with the victim or the abused, or, the person who's been hurt or suffered, but are you actually willing to do the reparative work needed for the person who's been the abuser?
Mm-hmm.
And for some folks, they're able to do that. For other folks, they're not. And it's no shame of where you end and begin. But a lot of yoga teachers think they're open for all kinds of business, or that they need to be open for all kinds of business, and that's what being, that's what having ahimsa in you, and sort of that nonviolence and that openness and that compassion. Actually, compassion is being able to say, yes, I can work with you. No, I can't work with you. Here's a good option.
Yeah.
That's actually the most compassionate thing. Or to be able to say, actually, so-and-so client in front of me, I can't take your case on. That's not going to be ethical for me. And so my advice is sort of twofold. It's like really doing the inner work needed for yourself, whatever that looks like, whether it's supervision or mentoring or counseling or journaling or like training, like whatever it is, to really understand yourself in the context of the population at hand. It's so easy, especially when it's something close to home. It's like you so desperately want to help them, but then you're like, why do I feel so triggered all the time?
Right.
And to be able to, you can't know what's yours and what's theirs and how to separate it out and anything about the internal boundaries if you're not doing the internal work you need for your. That adage of I don't need therapy, I do yoga, is so wrong on so many levels. Actually, like it's actually just so, I think, in some ways, sure, like just going to a sweaty vinyasa class can actually make you feel better.
Sure.
And if you're not like actually repairing some of the neuronal networks that are creating that pathway anyway, literally those get healed in relationship to other people, right. AKA like a therapist.
Right. Well, and that's where the tricky part comes in, and it's something that I've experienced and I've seen happen externally as well, is when yoga becomes your therapy, your yoga teacher becomes your therapist. And if your yoga teacher doesn't know where they end and somebody else's skill set begins, that relationship becomes very skewed and very unhealthy. And then I left yoga and needed therapy.
Right. No, it's really, it's common and interesting. Like our current market of yoga, we, as yoga teachers, we can easily become like a one-stop shop. Like,
right.
Like somehow we're the philosopher, the movement educator, it's like going to like having the same teacher for all the subjects. It's like they're your gym teacher, they're your philosophy teacher, they're your writing teacher, they're your home ec teacher, and I'm sort of the passion of like, if you teach yoga, teach yoga. Unless you have credentials to do something else with teaching yoga.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It keeps it a little bit cleaner, and it's hard. We want to help people, and I think yoga in the current new age climate has become a helping profession rather than a profession around movement education, which is really what asana is. Doing enough internal work with reflection to help you know where you are, what you are, how you're being in the world, and what you want. That is, I think, always the place to begin and come back to.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're welcome so much.
I love your brain.
Such a nice compliment.